TikTok is one of the most popular of all time, with over 25 million views. Sean has conducted research with over a third of Fortune 100 companies, as well as the NFL, NASA, and 6 Marine battalions at Camp Pendleton. He's been invited to 2 Super Soul Sunday interviews with Oprah Winfrey and is one of only 2 external speakers to speak to the president's staff at Camp David. But Sean says he's most proud of his work with low-income schools and bringing magic to the lives of his 2 wonderful children. Please give a warm welcome to Sean Akers.
Well, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'm so happy you showed up. I thought like one person was going to show up today.
Aww.
You already had a closing session, right? And you're here today. So I am so grateful and thrilled that you showed up. I had no idea you'd be here. And I'm so grateful to be back at Workhuman. And I'm so excited for today because you are the very first audience. How many people have heard me speak before? Okay, several of you. If you've heard that talk, you've heard a talk I've given 1,500 times in 50 countries across the globe. But today, you are the very first audience that's ever getting to hear my new talk on the power. Which makes me so excited, but so nervous. Because I've never even done this whole talk completely once in practice. I've only done chunks of it. And I have no idea if these jokes are funny or if they're gonna resonate. So if you hear anything close to funny today, like laugh 8 times more than you normally would. And if I'm talking about any of the research and it's resonating with you, just nod at me or give me a thumbs up, or if it's really good, 2 thumbs up. That helps me know what actually works. But I'm grateful you're here today because your beliefs led you into this room. And what I'm interested in is what happens next. The research that I'm doing here today is about a book that comes out next week. It comes out on Tuesday, called The Power of Beliefs. And what I argue in it is that beliefs are not only powerful, beliefs are becoming more powerful and predictive in the modern world. That our beliefs shape not only our experience of the present, but they predict what happens next. And that if we could identify what the most predictive beliefs that someone could hold at work or at home or about one another, then we could strengthen those beliefs and change what happens next. Because what I'm going to argue with you here this morning is that beliefs change not only the math about what is possible and probable in our lives, but by changing the math, beliefs change our path. So I'm so excited. Let's get started here today. So growing up, I went as a Ghostbuster for 8 consecutive Halloweens in a row. That fact never makes it into my intro bio, but I believed that I was going to become a Ghostbuster someday. I believed that someday I would be in front of people talking about PKG meters and proton packs and ecto-containment systems. And to that little 8-year-old boy who believed that, I just want to say, we're doing it, buddy. We're doing it. I believed that I was going to become a Ghostbuster because I watched the movie at the age of 4, which I recommend to no one. If you have not seen this movie before, about 2 minutes into the movie, you're going to meet a ghost librarian in the New York Public Library that's about to get upset. And she is about to scar you for the rest of your life. I don't even like flying through LaGuardia because it's too close to the New York Public Library. I believe, so my kids, I have an 8-year-old and a 12-year-old. They grew up watching Paw Patrol and Trash Truck and My Little Pony like 50th generation. I grew up with Goonies and Gremlins and Ghostbusters and Dark Crystal and Labyrinth. And before those terrifying movies, there were previews for movies that had people like Freddy Krueger and Jason and Chucky. And it changes you. If you're here at Workhuman and your name is Jason, I do not trust you. And I'm willing to bet if there's any Chucks here in the room, you don't go by Chucky on any of your dating websites or anything. That's because the lens through which we view the world changes what happens next, which makes it no surprise when I tell you that when I was growing up, I had nightmares every single night growing up, which leads to a story that I want to start this research with you here today about an experiment that I did at the age of 4 that not only changed the next 3 years of my life, but sheds light on the nature of the power of beliefs, but also leads directly into one of the most extraordinary scientific discoveries that's been made over the past 5 years. So I had chronic, persistent nightmares growing up, which is just a redundant way of saying I had nightmares every single night growing up. And my parents were very concerned. I mean, not concerned enough to stop taking me to those movies, but they were concerned because not only was I afraid to go to sleep, but it was also changing how I thought about myself. Because I thought most normal people, most normal kids don't have nightmares every night. So this clearly means that I'm not normal. So in an act of absolute love, this act is both loving and nerdy. My father, who is a neuroscientist at Baylor University, took me up as a 4-year-old to a psychology lab, and he hooked me up to a brainwave machine to show me the little squiggly lines to prove to me that my brain was normal, so that I would believe that I was normal even though I had nightmares every night. Unfortunately, that experiment happened in an anechoic chamber, which if there's any researchers in the room, you're already smiling, because you know that's a terrifyingly dark, padded wall, echoless chamber that if you scream on the inside, no one can hear you on the outside. I had more nightmares after the experiment than before the experiment, so I had to solve this myself. So at the age of 4, as a budding young scientist, I made a crucial scientific discovery, an observation that would change the next 3 years of my life. I noticed that every time I would wake up from having nightmares, the 4 stuffed animals that I kept at the foot of my bunk bed were not on the bunk bed anymore. They were scattered around the floor around my bunk bed. The same bunk bed that my sister fell off at the unicorn in the TED Talk. And it was crystal clear what was happening. I know you're thinking it now. If those stuffed animals fall on the floor, then I'm gonna have a nightmare. I had to find a way of keeping those stuffed animals on the bed. Now, as an adult, this is not a problem at all. I would take some duct tape, I would duct tape those 4 stuffed animals to the foot of the bunk bed and call it a night. But I was 4, and I didn't want to hurt my stuffed animals. So every night for the next 3 years, I would take my 4 stuffed animals and put them carefully and lovingly at the foot of my bunk bed, then turn on the brightest light in my closet that would shine onto my bed and right into my eyes so I could see those stuffed animals. Then I would get into bed and put my hands underneath my back and try to not move all night, willing myself to not knock them off. And I was right, because every time I had a nightmare, I'd wake up and those stuffed animals were on the floor. 3 years later, my brain finally had enough brain development to realize what was going on. That maybe I wasn't having nightmares because the stuffed animals fell on the floor, maybe the stuffed animals fell on the floor because I had a nightmare. So I did one of the bravest experiments I'll ever do. I took those 4 stuffed animals, and that night, I put them right next to the bunk bed on the floor. I turned off the closet light and got into bed, and tried not to think of the New York Public Library. And after a few minutes, or probably an hour, I fell asleep, and I didn't have any nightmares that night. And the next night, I didn't have nightmares. And that whole week, I didn't have nightmares. I beat chronic, persistent nightmares as a child as soon as I was able to change a faulty belief I had about the world that was changing what happens next. That belief, that faulty belief, which is, by the way, a logical fallacy you saw coming this whole time I was telling the story. We even have a Latin name. We have a Latin name for this. It's post hoc ergo propter hoc. I mean, how did I not know this? Because I was 4 and I didn't know which way the causation flowed. So every night as I would go to sleep, my brain was hyper vigilant, trying to find out where those century stuffed animals were, which caused my anxiety to rise, which, as we know, is the trigger for nightmares. If we could short circuit that faulty belief, it would change what happens next. Which leads to a study that just came out of January this year. A study that came out several decades after that little child was trying to fall asleep and to not have nightmares. And a study that is one of the most incredible studies that I've heard in recent years. And the study came out of Yale University. I know, I'm surprised too. What they found is they tracked 11,000 seniors over a 12-year period of time. And what they looked at was the physical and mental capabilities of those individuals over a 12-year period of time, from 65 to 77. Now, our beliefs in the modern world is that as you age, you decline mentally and physically. That is what people believe. And guess what they found in this study? They found that that is absolutely true. You decline mentally and physically as you get older. That's for most people, and that's for the average person. But when you looked into the data, they found that 32% of the seniors, almost 1 out of 3 of the seniors, their cognitive functioning on multiple tests, including memory and counting back from sevens and intelligence tests, that it actually improved from age 65 to 77, which makes sense. 77 is about when people start running for president in the United States. I'm so glad that one worked. But these seniors, 1 out of 3, did the exact opposite of what we believed. We don't even put that in the belief category. We say that's in the scientific fact category. Sean, as you age, there's a decline mentally and physically. I'm not going to argue with that, but what I'm going to argue with is what the study is showing is that for 1 out of 3, it didn't happen from 65 to 77. In fact, there was cognitive improvement on these scores. 26% of the seniors, they actually improved physically. This is brisk walking tasks, this is the acuteness of the symptoms they're experiencing. They actually were doing better at 77 than they were at 65, a quarter of them. So they tried to figure out, why is this happening? This is the opposite of the beliefs that we hold about the world. So they went back into the data, and if you hold everything constant, the one differentiating factor that caused such a massive split for these seniors was whether or not the senior believed that aging led to deterioration and becoming useless in society, or age led to growth and potential positive change. And if they had that belief not only changed their experience, it predicted what happened next on something as powerful as something we thought was a scientific fact that we could not change. What we were starting to see is that we were changing the way that we were looking at the world. And we actually, before we go any further, as we're talking about beliefs here today, I want to, there's lots of ways that people can define beliefs. Here's the correct way. What we found is, I'm going to argue today that beliefs are simply the lens through which your brain processes the world. That our beliefs are the lens through which you process. Now, when I ask people about their beliefs, and I tell them about this new book, I'll say, so tell me about, what are your beliefs? And they'll immediately tell me if they're liberal or conservative. And then I say, all right, so give me some more beliefs. And then they might tell you if they're religious or not and what religion they are. And then I say, all right, great, so give me some more beliefs. And then they start to peter out. And then they say stuff like, I don't know, I believe my Jets are going to win the Super Bowl next year, which we both know is not going to happen. Right? But then they run out. But you actually have unlimited amount of beliefs about the world. You have beliefs about whether or not your compensation is fair. You have belief about flare pants and whether or not we should wear collars to speak in. We have beliefs about who drives a Cybertruck, a liberal or a conservative. We have beliefs about whether or not crypto has value or whether it's safe to get into a Waymo. We have beliefs you don't even know you have. Researchers have found consistently that if we give you a fake sugar pill with no medicine in it, but we color it yellow or orange, it, for many people, has a stimulant effect upon the body, even though there's no medicine in it. And if it's green or blue, it has a tranquilizing effect upon it, even if there's no medicine in it. You might not even know you have that belief, but that belief is shaping what happens next in your life. And if that's the case, it behooves us to look at what are the beliefs that we hold about the world in which we're living in, and how is that shaping our work and our ability to work as humans in the midst of an AI revolution, and what does it mean when we leave this room as well? Because we have faulty beliefs about a lot of things. And for example, I worked a lot with college students at Harvard. I lived in the dorms with the college students for eight years, trying to counsel them during that hyper-competitive year of being at Harvard, where they went from being top 1% of their high school with all those beliefs to now 50% of them are below average. And in the midst of that, we were trying to figure out how do you improve their life in the midst of an educational environment. And if you take a college student who is surrounded by, who has two parents who love him, and he has friends who would do anything for him. And he has professors and coaches and teachers who believe in his potential. But if he believes that he is unlovable or believes that he is alone, that belief is not true, but it's real. So what we're going to be talking about here today is that beliefs are real even when they're not true. And how does that shape what happens next in our life? And we have lots of faulty beliefs about the world. If you've heard my previous talk, I talk about the happiness advantage, where one of the faulty beliefs is we think if I work harder, I'll be more successful, then I'll be happier. But that doesn't work because our brain is constantly changing the goalpost of what success looks like. But if you flip it around, if you can get the brain to become more positive, every single business and educational outcome improves. We have faulty beliefs about aging or about going to sleep at night. Growing up, you're probably thinking about faulty beliefs, and afterwards, please tell me some of the faulty beliefs, because I've only got 2 here for this next part. But I believe that if I opened a dishwasher growing up mid-cycle, like a cube of water was gonna splash into my face. And I had a friend whose little sister, believed that if someone died in a movie, that actor literally sacrificed their life for the sake of that film, which makes watching Titanic very hard. We have faulty beliefs, and it's not just kids or seniors that have this. Michael Jordan, one of the greatest basketball players ever, I learned this in the midst of writing this book. I've followed him for years. I have never heard the study, and I've checked it over and over again to make sure that this is true, because I'd never heard this. But it turns out he believed that he could increase his performance in a game and increase his likelihood of success if he wore his UNC college basketball shorts. But he was then playing in professional leagues. So he wore, underneath his Chicago Bulls professional shorts, he wore a second pair of shorts, his UNC college shorts, which he believed would improve his, so he wore 2 pairs of shorts for most of his professional career. And hilariously, the UNC shorts were slightly too long, so there's some pictures you can see online where you can see it coming out the bottom. So he requested from the trainers if he could get longer, baggier shorts, which at the time we believed was not cool, but when we saw Michael Jordan wearing them, now it's cool to have longer, baggier shorts, which changed what we believe is fashionable as we play basketball. Now, if you ask Michael Jordan why he wins, he would tell you something like that his insane basketball skills or his never die mentality. But I bet if he showed up to a game and those UNC shorts were gone, he would freak out because he believed that those shorts would increase his performance. But here's the most interesting part about this research. If you believe that it's going to increase your performance, it changes the math about what's possible and probable, and it does change your performance as you move forward. Serena Williams, if she is winning in a tennis tournament, and as soon as she started winning, she would not wash the socks that she was wearing, and she would keep wearing those socks throughout the rest of the tournament. And she did an interview for ESPN, she said, it's gross, but it works. She believes that wearing dirty socks will lead to greater levels of performance. And actually, it might be leading to greater levels of performance because of the way that the brain works. In order to show you this, to show you how powerful the lens is to which you view the work, I'm going to take you back before I move you forward. I'm going to take you through some of the research that many of you are aware of, but we're leading to something that completely changes everything. It's the reason I wrote The Power of Beliefs. So let's go back to World War II. Supposedly there's a story about a young medic who started to panic because he was trying to care for all these US soldiers that were in extreme amounts of pain, but they were running low on supplies. And they ran out of morphine, the painkiller that was supposed to be helping them. So he didn't know what to do. Panicked, he went back into a storage room and he found some IV bags, and then with masking tape and a marker, he wrote morphine on the bag. And then he brought these bags out and started giving it to the soldiers who were in the midst of all this pain. And what he found was for every 6 of the 10 soldiers he gave the fake morphine to, that their pain dropped significantly and their pain tolerance rose. Fast forward 10 years to Harvard Medical School in the 50s, where Henry Beecher, an anesthesiologist, published a paper that changed the entire landscape of psychology and medicine. He published a paper that many of you know called The Powerful Placebo. And in it, he argued in 19 different conditions and experiments, he found that if you give a fake drug or a fake treatment to a participant, a placebo, but they believe that that treatment is real, that fake treatment that's not real creates real physical and health outcomes on the backside. That they could change what happens next, similar to what was happening if you took one of the strongest tier of medicines or a treatment that's been tested over and over again. At the cutting edge of biotechnology today, that some of you are involved with, at the cutting edge of biotechnology, we compare every new drug to something as old as human history, to the power of beliefs. Because we want to see if it's just your belief that's actually healing you, or if it's this new drug and chemical compound that we've come up with. We've known for a long time that our beliefs are powerful, but we underestimate as a society how powerful they are. In 2001, a study was done at Baylor College of Medicine, where my father was. Dr. Mosley offered to 300 gentlemen who had a degenerative knee condition that only gets worse over time, he offered them a free, life-changing surgery to solve this. This sounds amazing. Unfortunately, it's also a psychology experiment, so you know it's about to get bad pretty quickly. And that's what happened. For 200 of the gentlemen, they came in, Dr. Mosley put them under general anesthesia, made an incision upon their knee, cleaned out the cartilage, repaired some of the tendons, and then sutured them back up, giving them a lifelong scar. 100 of the gentlemen came in, and Dr. Mosley put them under general anesthesia, made an incision upon their knee, went and got a coffee, came back and sutured them back up, giving them a lifelong scar. If you think it's crazy that psychologists get away with this, you are not wrong. I know some of you are like, I'm getting mad because I had knee surgery. I had back surgery. My question to you is, did you? Did you? I had back surgery, I have a scar, but I signed so many consent forms before going into that surgery, and who reads consent forms? I have no idea what actually happened. But here's the craziest part. That's not the crazy part of the study. The crazy part is at the 6-month mark. At the 6-month mark, there was almost no difference between the people who had a real knee surgery and people who believed they had a real knee surgery because they had a lifelong scar on their knee. Their pain, their mobility, the inflammation all had almost identical drops, which was not a repudiation of the surgeries we knew worked. It was a validation. The beliefs were creating effects that we didn't even think were possible. Because there's lots of questions in the literature about the morality of placebos, which I totally agree with, and about the methodology involved with them. But it turns out it wasn't just 6 months. At the 1-year mark and 18-month year mark, there was almost no difference between those gentlemen. In a lifelong condition that only gets worse, there's no natural healing. So what was amazing about this is that we were seeing the power of beliefs. Many of you know about that placebo research. What I want to do now is a huge and surprising turn. About 8 years ago, I was reading a study on depression and an antidepressant that people were using in the study, and I was comparing it to a 2001 study. It was the same antidepressant that was being used, and what I happened to notice was that the placebo effect, the likelihood of a fake antidepressant drug creating a positive effect and dropping depression, was wildly different for the two studies. Why would that be happening? Why would the power of belief be shifting between different studies? That's clearly a methodological issue. They screwed up the study. But then I got fascinated, and I started exploring it a little bit more. And after 120 papers and meta-analyses that I read, what I discovered is in heart disease, in cancer, in childhood epilepsy, in depression, anxiety, and 23 different forms of chronic pain, between 2000 and today, the placebo effect for many of those conditions has doubled, if not tripled, for some of these conditions. What this means for you is that scientifically, and for some reason, beliefs are more powerful and predictive now than they were just 20 years ago. Or it seems as if beliefs are more healing than they were just 20 years ago. We live in a world in which we're fighting and we're human for what it is to be human. And we're fighting in a world in which it feels like human belief is on the decline. With technological precision and with AI and with MRIs and SSRIs, it's so easy for us to believe that the power of human belief is on the decline. And scientifically, what we're finding is the exact opposite, like we saw in the Yale study. What we're finding is the power of beliefs is actually ascending. And we're seeing it not just in medicine, we're seeing it within our sports, in our companies, and our schools as well, which I'm going to get to share all of that incredible research with you here today, showing that our brains are changing the way that we think about the world in ways that we didn't expect beforehand. There's a paper that went viral that many of you, an article that went viral that many of you saw, and in it, the author, I think his name's James Walsh, he argued, and I'm sorry if I got his name wrong right now, but he argued that he was lamenting the fact that college professors were contemplating using ChatGPT to grade papers because he knew that they know that the students are doing their papers with ChatGPT. So what they were starting to do was the papers written by ChatGPT were being graded by ChatGPT, making the entire educational experience a conversation between two robots or just one, right? Which in the midst of that, we start to feel like, okay, what's the value of humans as we move forward? Well, one of the things that AI, I believe, has shown us is something incredible. AI can predict your odds of surviving cancer, but it can never believe that you will beat those odds. That is one of the things it cannot do. It can predict the odds of finding a job, but it can't predict that you're gonna beat those odds. Now we can program it to say you can do it, or to support the underdog, but before that it's determined that your odds are this and that. It actually doesn't believe that you're even gonna win if you are scheduled to win, because belief requires emotion and willpower, and grit, and that quiet determination, that fire that says, I can beat these odds. So what we're seeing is that belief is actually something that's innately human in the midst of a world that can predict what's going on. So it can predict the world, but can never believe that you're gonna find love. And it also doesn't care. Ask it. Ask it, it doesn't have emotions. So it'll be like, I'm sorry you're sick today, here's the following things you could be doing. Stop taking NyQuil, or whatever it is that it's saying, right? I don't know why I picked that one, but if you make NyQuil, great, I use it. Sorry. That joke will get cut very quickly from my talk. But if you ask it, it has no emotions. It doesn't care if you leave the room. It doesn't care if you get back. It doesn't care if you find love. It doesn't care if you get over cancer. It can predict the odds, but belief is something that's uniquely human. And those beliefs shape the way that we look at the world. And as we're doing that, part of what we wanted to find is if we could change the lens through which we view the world, we could predict what happens next. But that leads us to some really important questions about why this is happening. Let's talk about why this is happening. Why are we seeing the power of beliefs rising in our society? And especially in the midst of a world with all this technological precision. So I'm gonna argue, so I got started back at Harvard Divinity School. I was studying Christian ethics, comparing it to Buddhist ethics. I wanted to understand how our beliefs about the world shape what happens next. So this next part, I'm gonna deviate from psychology to look back at religion and history for a moment. When you look at all of human history up until about the past 20 years, our shared belief systems came from four things: our village, our job, the political system, and your religion. But only recently, we've become, as a society, untethered from all four. We no longer stay in the same village. We scatter across the world for work and for school, and even if you're in the same village, it turns out researchers found that adult American males are having 60% lower face-to-face communication than they did just 20 years ago. The village is starting to collapse. And when you look at our work, Gallup found that only 16, this is 1 year old, but 16% of people want to have the same job next year that they have this year, which is the lowest in recorded history. So we don't even stay with the same job. And we have the lowest rates of trust in our government. And only 5% of people claim to have no religious beliefs in the United States in 2000. Today, went from 5% to 24%. We didn't learn anything over the past 24 years to prove that there's no afterlife or a God. But there's been a massive shift in the belief systems that we have about the world. And it's changing us. I think we're going through a period right now that I call the Great Drift. The Great Drift is where we've drifted away from those four sources of belief that led to our shared sense of meaning and purpose and collective beliefs. And in the midst of that, we're still hungry. We still want and yearn for meaning and purpose and belief within our lives. That's why we come to events called Work Human, because we want to believe that there's meaning in the midst of the work that we're doing for the world. And it changes us. So when we feel that desire, but we don't have those old sources, we listen to influencers that are just as angry and broken as the rest of us. Or people are lonely, so they cling on to OnlyFans subscriptions, or they scroll through social media looking for dopamine hits, but it just makes you feel like you're missing out. And what it's done is led to what I call in the book the 4 horsemen of the modern world: burnout, anxiety, loneliness, and depression. Depression rates have doubled. We're going to go dark for 1 minute, and then I'm going to bring us back. But depression rates have doubled for every age group, including 8-year-olds, over the past 2 years. Anxiety, it is this historic highs. We know that the Surgeon General, we talk about this at every one of the Work Human events, that the Surgeon General found loneliness is an epidemic in the United States. That is not the worst part. The worst part is we've given up hope that those numbers are going to significantly come back down. We thought the pandemic was going to do it. We thought people would be happier and more connected after the pandemic, and the numbers got worse. And it's not just these psychological ones, it's the economic ones too. Last month, before the conflict in Iran, we had the lowest recorded consumer sentiment, the belief in the economy that powers consumer spending, that powers the revenue of most of your organizations. The lowest consumer sentiment in the past 7 years in our recorded time of doing it. Lower belief in the economy than during the pandemic, when we shut the entire world economy down. Beliefs are real even when they're not true, but it shapes us, and it shapes trillions of dollars of investment and activity, and whether or not we engage with political systems or religious systems in our lives. And as a result of that, the Great Drift has left us with what I believe are 7 scars. 7 scars on the way that we look at one another and the world and our work that transform what happens next. These are the 7 negative versions of the core beliefs that I talk about in the book, the most predictive beliefs we hold. And as you listen to them, think about somebody before I say them. Think about somebody you know that's suffering in your life. Think about someone who's suffering. Maybe it's you, but think about someone else. And then I'm willing to bet money they're struggling with one of these beliefs in the midst of it. They believe that their behavior doesn't matter. They believe that they're alone. They believe that they don't matter. They believe that this work is not meaningful, that they have nothing to give, that they're missing out, or that there's nothing greater than them. When we have those beliefs, it changes us. The thesis of the power of beliefs is simply this: that if you take the same employee in the same company, same economy, same benefits, same AI revolution, and you change one belief in them, that's a core belief. If you have them believe that their work is meaningful versus my work is not meaningful, you're going to get a complete split in what happens next in their retention rates, their productivity, their sales, their performance, and their healthcare costs. You take the same kid with ADHD, and if you change one belief for them, they believe my behavior matters despite this diagnosis. Or they believe my behavior doesn't matter because I have ADHD. You're going to get a complete split in what happens in that child's educational experience coming next. Or one last example, you take someone who has stage 3 cancer, you keep the same doctors, same friends, same condition, but you change one thing, they believe that they're alone, or they believe that they're with other people in the midst of it. We have decades worth of research showing that changes the remission rates, it changes how acute their symptoms are, it changes the likelihood of them beating cancer. Same world, different beliefs, different outcomes. So if we could take those negative core beliefs that people are holding and we strengthen the polar opposites of them, some pretty remarkable things happen. If we can get people, and this is actually a lot of the work you're doing, we're just synthesizing it into a beliefs category in aggregate. Get someone to believe that their behavior matters. If we believe that my behavior matters, that I'm not alone, that I matter, that this work is meaningful, that I have something to give, that I have something to be grateful for, or there's something greater than me, what happens next is same world, different beliefs, different outcomes. The question is, can we get people to change? Now, when we think about beliefs, we oftentimes think beliefs are very hard to change. You look at addiction recovery programs, it takes a long time, it seems like, for our beliefs to change about the world, which we'll come back to that in just a moment. or we think that, if you have somebody in your family who is a pessimist, maybe an in-law, you think if you're born a pessimist, you die a pessimist, that's the end of the story, right? Or if someone grows up in a family that doesn't have religious beliefs, then they're not going to have. Maybe I can I get a handheld or something? Then they believe that that they won't have religious beliefs. We believe oftentimes the belief change is not possible. A few years ago, I worked with a large organization. I was working with Training Magazine, and we came in to measure their HR leaders. And one of the things that we thank you so much. Don't hurry. Oh, you're so kind. Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Okay. All right, I'll start all over. So I want to be a So we measured in a study these HR leaders, and one of the questions that we asked them, because we do work with trainings and interventions in organizations, we asked them, how likely do you think it is that a training you run at your organization or a book will move the needle long-term for an employee? And the answers were depressingly low. So low, especially because this is the work that we do. So in the study, what we were having people do was commit to positive habits. So we got them to write down 3 new things that they were grateful for, or we had them to journal about a positive experience, or do a brisk walk every day for 15 minutes, meditate for 2 minutes, and write a 2-minute positive email, praising or thanking one person in their life. And then we measured them again, and we were testing the habits, but what we discovered was, when we asked that same question about how much do you think a training could have an impact upon an organization, or a book, or a program, it turns out it rose dramatically. Their belief that it could move the needle changed dramatically after they had experienced change happen within their life. Because what they started to believe is, if this change is possible for me, change might be possible for other people. So what I would love to talk about is change possible? And how much change is possible? And I don't know the best transition to this, so how about this one? So Sean, why don't you tell us a little bit about the neuroscience of belief change? Okay, that's a great question. It felt like ChatGPT. That's a fantastic next question for people who want to learn more about the power of beliefs, --. Let's delve into the research. Actually, I'm going to take you not directly into the research. Let me take you into a story that's going to lead to the research. I grew up in a faith tradition where we believe that if you have enough belief, that you could possibly move a mountain. This story is the opposite. This is how a mountain can actually scientifically move our beliefs. So a few years ago, my wife and I, Michelle Geelan, who some of you have heard speak, she's amazing. She's the smarter, prettier, more interesting version of me. She's got a book coming out this fall called Resilient Optimism, which everyone should read or go see the movie if they make one. It's just amazing. She's phenomenal. My wife and I decided that we were going to go on an 8-hour hike in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. We decided this in February, but we were going to go in October when the leaves were changing color. And then I got a genius idea. What if we brought our 8-year-old son on this hike with us? My wife said something very kind, like, you have so many great ideas, but that might not be one of them. Actually, what she said was, that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard. It's an 8-hour hike, and it's uneven ground, and you have to go up a mountain, and then go over 4 other peaks, and then come down the other side of the mountain. There's no way he's coming with us. So I bugged her for the next 8 months, and the night before the hike, the answer was still absolutely no. And then my son, with minimal coaching from me, went up to Michelle and said, "Mom, is there any way I could go on this hike with you? Because I want something to be proud of." The next morning, the 3 of us went on a hike in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. We started our 8-hour hike at 9 a.m. and we finished at 11 a.m. the next day. It started out so well. The leaves were beautiful. We were in good spirits. I was recounting the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy for my son to keep him engaged. We kept getting passed by all these hikers, and I thought to myself, I know what they're thinking. They're thinking, what an amazing dad to bring his son on this hike. What a special dad to have this meaningful experience with his kids. And I was special because there were no other kids out on this trip. The only problem with little kids is that they have little legs. And at the 6-hour mark, where I kept delaying lunch, because it's right around the bend, guys, let me tell you about Gollum. It turns out, at the 6-hour mark, we finally made it through the first third of the hike. But the problem is, we can't go back down there as too treacherous. You actually can only go forward over these other peaks and then come back down the other side of the ridge. But the sun now was gonna set in 2 hours. So it was the first time I had ever felt trapped, honestly. I had this moment where I was like, I have no idea what to do. Because normally, if we run out of food, I would call Uber Eats, right? If my car breaks down on the way there, I will call it an Uber, right? If I get injured, I'll call an ambulance to take me to the hospital. There was no one to call on that mountain, not even Uber. We couldn't get a helicopter to even land up there to take us down if we got injured. So I huddled us together and I said, Michelle and Leo, we can't take any more breaks the rest of the day, we just have to run. 5 minutes later, we realized that's not a thing. Also, we learned that it had snowed up on the ridge, which we didn't know at the base. At the third peak, the sun set and we got stuck. And miraculously, we found an emergency hut that had been built back in 1888 with no electricity, obviously. And we huddled together for warmth on a snowy mountain in the White Mountains of New Hampshire in 34-degree temperature with no blankets and no flashlight. The next morning, something utterly ordinary happened. The sun rose, and we rose, and we were actually in good spirits. We'd just gone on this 8-hour hike the day before, and we actually felt like we had energy. We hiked down the mountain. It took us another 4.5 hours to get down the other side of the mountain, but we did it, and we actually got down. That's not the point of the story. The point of the story is the belief change that happened in the midst of it. Neuroscientists have found they can actually watch on specific neuroscans that if you provide new information to a brain based upon experience, they can now watch the brain basically encode a new beliefs almost at the speed of light with the electrical impulse of the brain that changes not only our neural pathways, it changes what happens next in the decision making. We can see beliefs change almost at the speed of light. On the other end of this, I got started back at divinity school. I mentioned that I was studying Buddhist ethics as well. In traditional Buddhism, you work very hard with discipline and rigor, with daily habits to inch your way towards enlightenment off in the future. And then there's Zen Buddhism. And Zen Buddhism is you reach enlightenment spontaneously or in fits and bursts along the way, that it could be instantaneous along the way. When I look at the research literature, it seems like both are actually accurate. But it's much more on the speed of change that we thought was possible, which I'll come back to in a moment. But the final part of the story is the important part. We got back to our rental property. Now, what that story that I just shared with you, that story, some of you are listening to it and you're like, wow, he gave his son a meaningful experience. He can write that in a college essay someday. Good for you. And some of you are like, I feel like I need to be calling Child Protective Services. Right? I don't think Leo's safe. Both of you are right. But what that masked is I was actually a helicopter parent. Proudly a helicopter parent. It wasn't like I was on the ground with them, but I was constantly hovering there because I know that they're gonna fall, and when they fall, I don't want them to fall as hard. But I was on the side of helicopter parent. I know Jonathan Haidt says don't do that, but I was on the side of, if we had an edge in our house, it had at least 2 inches of padding, even if it was a baseboard in our house. Our whole house was padded to keep them safe. So I was an entrenched helicopter parent. On our rental property, before we got to the hike, there was a creek behind it. And there was a flimsy board that they put over the creek. Every time my son would excitedly go to cross it, my brain would immediately freak out and say, hey Leo, hey buddy, watch your step. Hey buddy, you can actually fall in there. Hey Leo, hey, watch your step as you go across that. But this time, after going on the hike, with the speed the neuroscientists would be proud of, as I saw my son approach that little rickety bridge, my brain instantly made a new calculation. It recalculated because he has a Fitbit, and we know he went over 40,000 steps over uneven ground and slept overnight in an emergency hut. And my beliefs about his capabilities shifted in that moment, and it believed he's got this. And so for the first time on that vacation, as he started to walk across that bridge, I didn't say anything, and he fell right into the creek. No, he was fine, and that's the point. But I was an entrenched helicopter parent, 2 generations of helicopter parents. That's how entrenched these beliefs are. And overnight, a single experience changed my beliefs, that changed my actions in that moment. And he changed his beliefs too. He went back to school and he told 2 of his teachers and 1 of his friends, I'm a hiker. I'm a hiker. Which is, we've gone on dozens of hikes before. But for the first time ever, that experience overnight shifted his beliefs, and now he believes that he's a hiker. And if you believe you're a hiker, what do you do next? You hike more mountains. Which leads to a study that I'm going to share with you now that I think is so incredible about the way that we look at the world. By the way, that was an exciting version of how belief change can happen very quickly, but belief change can happen instantaneously in small little moments. Like with the addiction recovery work that we've done in the past, and in the research that's there and the groups that I've worked with, we know it seems to take a long time for some of these beliefs to change. At the same time, we also know that someone, when they hit rock bottom or they hit another car, we find in those moments sometimes their beliefs change overnight and they become sober. We have parents who have been addicted to nicotine in the cigarettes and been smoking for over a decade, maybe even since they were 12. But as soon as they have a kid, the day that they have a baby, they stop smoking. What we're finding is belief can change instantly. And it can change is something as quick or as small as a piece of praise, a peer-to-peer praise between one another, right? It could be a nod that you get from a manager that lets you know that your behavior matters. It can be the first time you see someone smile back at you at a bar, or it could be the first time, I don't know what a bar, but someone smiling back at you at a work human conference, or someone or that first time that your basketball actually went in the game when you've been missing all the other shots. Those moments can change our beliefs if positioned in the right way. And I'm going to talk about how to frame them so that our beliefs could change us instantaneously in those moments. But what we're looking at is how do we get people to be able to change their beliefs in a faster way? So one of the most incredible experiments that I've done, that I didn't do, one of the most incredible experiments in the book, I think, is a study that shows the exact opposite of the hill study, so the hiking story. So in the hiking story, a mountain changed our beliefs about the world instantaneously and overnight. This story is about research about how our beliefs can not just move a mountain, it actually changes the mountain in front of us. Many of you have heard some of this research coming out of the University of Virginia. They found that if you look at a hill you need to climb in front of you, light waves bounce off the hill and go into your visual cortex, and amazingly, you see a picture of a hill. That's phenomenal. We can tear apart every cell in your brain and we can't find that picture of the hill, but you can see it right now. You can even imagine it. But if you're looking at a hill, your brain tells you you're seeing a hill. This is the most amazing part. If the participant is alone looking at the hill, the perception researchers found if the participant is alone and they believe that they're going to be alone climbing that hill, the picture their brain shows them in their visual cortex looks 15% steeper than when you put them next to a participant that they're told is going to climb the hill with them. This is one of my favorite studies because that should not be happening. I thought perception's objective. If I see a hill or challenge in our world, that's how big it is and I can decide whether or not to climb it. That is not how human perception works. Before you decide if you can climb the hill, your beliefs of whether or not you're alone or not already changed the size of that hill in front of you. And it's not just the physical ones. We know the emotional ones, the percentage is even higher. Trying to overcome anxiety and depression in the midst of an AI revolution while caring for aging parents or for sick children in the midst of a world where there's so much geopolitical change. Those hills As you're on social media or sitting in meetings where your kids are taking tests, those hills are collapsing or expanding based upon, do you think you're alone facing those challenges, or are you with other people? Which is a validation of why you're here today. Because it turns out this is the reason why happiness cannot be self-help. As soon as we put happiness books in the self-help section of Barnes & Noble, we make it 20 to 30% steeper for people to achieve. Because they think, I'm not happy, I have to do this by myself. When the greatest predictor of long-term happiness, as many of you know, is your social connection score. It's other people. And what we're finding in those moments is that we're actually making it seem harder for other people. But also, this is the validation of why, if you know someone who's struggling in your life right now, one of the most powerful things you can do is let them know that they're not alone in the midst of it. This is why parents are so, I went through depression for 3 years when I was at Harvard. My parents couldn't solve the problem, and that ripped them up watching it. But they let me know that I was not alone as I was facing that. And that's one of the most powerful things we can do, and one of the greatest buffers against future depression. This is why our great friends are so important, or therapists, or coaches, or executive coaches, or pastors, those people that in the midst of looking at those hills, they let us know that we're not alone. There's a pastor named Matt Tuggle in Dallas who says this line that when he is helping people at the bottom, when they've just gone through a divorce that they never expected, or they just got fired, or they're grieving, part of his goal at the bottom is to help remind them that the future that they hoped for was not the only future with hope. And what I loved about this is that in those moments, you've got someone else beside you as you're looking at that hill, and it changes the perception of the hill in front of you. Which led to a second study that I mentioned in the book, which is leading somewhere very exciting. So there are fireflies and lightning bugs across the globe. They light up individually and randomly in the dark. Their success rate of reproduction per night is 3%. Which I'm told is very good. On opposite sides of the globe, in southeast Indonesia and the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee, 2 species figured out how to do it differently. Instead of lighting up individually in the dark, they all light up and they all go dark at the same time, timing their pulses to the millisecond with these neurotransmitters. It's beautiful, but not that smart, because they clearly haven't read Darwin. You have to be the fastest, smartest, brightest light shining, otherwise you'll never be successful. Why would you light up with your competition? But what MIT found is we underestimate the power of shared experience. And the mathematicians in the study found that when the fireflies light up together, alone, they cap out at 3% success rate. When they light up together, their success rate doesn't go down, it goes from 3% to 82%. Per bug. It's not like one bug's doing amazing with the new system. Like, keep going, guys, this is the best night of my life, or whatever they said. They were doing orders of magnitude better than we thought was possible, because we underestimated the world. And we realized it's not survival of the fittest, it's actually survival of the best fit. You can have the smartest kid in the world, go to the best university in the world, but if he or she doesn't find the right skill, the right friends, social set, peer, mentors, or professors that believe in them, they underperform, fail, or flounder. What we're finding is that we are better together, which led to something amazing. So, a few years ago, I was speaking at ANCC, which is one of the largest nursing conferences, and this group came up to me and they said, hey, we just want to let you know we've been researching you. I'm like, what? But it turns out that they, at the hospital, were, for the nurses that were going through all the stresses after the pandemic, they put half of them into, at Salem Health, into basically a technical training, and the other half, they had read my first book, but together. So they weren't reading it alone in isolation. They created a book club about a positive research that they could talk about together. And then they tracked them. And what they found is there was no change to the technical group, and their burnout rates were still extremely high. But for the group that did a book club together, it turns out that their happiness scores rose, subjective happiness, but their retention rates rose and their engagement scores rose dramatically. At the 6-week mark, at the 6-month mark, and at the 18-month mark after reading a book. It's the first clinical case we have of how nurses... I think this says nothing about my first book. I think that, just to be clear, I think what this is about shared experience. When you look at beliefs for the world, if you look at any political or economic group, they have a shared text. They have a constitution or scriptures or a Bible. They have a mission statement, a code of conduct. And those shared beliefs, those shared texts create shared beliefs, which create shared worlds. So with that in mind, I'm going to do this now because I know many of you are going to have to start leaving for the airport. You're so nice to come now. When I wrote this book, I told my wife, I don't care about making money on this book. I just want people to read it because I think that this research is so powerful. And you're so nice to show up today, and you're the first audience that's having to hear this. So we've been looking at these shared texts and how they change you. It's actually an entire strategy in the book. And what I wanted to do is I want to gift for everyone who showed up today a copy of my new book that'll You're so nice. So let me tell you what this is. I want it to not just be something you read, I want it to be something you share. So this is actually not for one copy, this is actually for 2 free copies through Amazon. So, and the reason I'm telling you this is because, well, first let me tell you how, this is just so you know what you're doing. This is a QR code that just takes you to a MailChimp site because my website crashed. And all it does is you put in your email address there, and then my wife this afternoon, my very patient wife, is gonna upload them to Amazon. And then within 24 hours, you will receive an email from Amazon with 2 free copies of the book. You just have to click for 2 copies of the hardcover. And the reason I wanted to do this is because it's helpful.
Wow. Thank you.
The reason I want to do this is that books are so much more powerful when we read them with other people instead of alone. So what my hope is that when you get this, that you will share it with someone who couldn't get to come to Work Human, or you get to share it with someone who you know loves this research, or needs this research right now, or maybe you have a kid who's off in college who's struggling and you want to be reading the same book with them. Whatever it is, you find the person that you want to share it with, but the goal of this is to read it with them instead of alone. And what we see based upon this research is that shared text create shared beliefs which change us and create shared worlds in the midst of it. So I work with a group called the Orange Frog. By the way, this is definitely, we know works 100% for US addresses. If there are people that are here that don't have a US address, I think it works across the globe. We couldn't test it, but you might have extra shipping that goes into it, but it should, so please feel free to try it anyway. But I work with a group called the Orange Frog, and part of what we were doing is we were trying to see, based upon a shared text, could we change the belief systems in a hospital? And we were doing this with companies and schools around the globe. But we worked with Genesis Health, which in the midst of the pandemic, they were not profitable, and they had to go through 2 rounds of restructuring, and then the pandemic hit. And one of the leaders there, Jordan Boyd, said, I want to come in and I want to talk about some of this happiness and positive research. And the people on his team said, we cannot be talking about happiness right now, right? We'll talk about happiness when we're done with these research. You know what? We'll talk about happiness when the pandemic is over because it's gonna be so easy then. But he said, if we're not talking about the positive, we're only given license to talk about the negative. And it's gonna change us. So what we got to do was a researcher's dream. We got to go in department by department at the hospital, and we got to come in with the same text. It was a parable called The Orange Frog, which there's 2 of my friends from The Orange Frog, Andy and Mel, are right there. They have a suitcase. If you want a free copy of The Orange Frog, it's just a little parable. They'll have them in the back corner over there if you just want to see what I wrote it. Originally, I thought it was going to be for schools and maybe for that one for adults and kids. We've used it with elite military units. We've used it in the midst of COVID at NASA. We've seen it in these places where I didn't expect it to go, but it was the same shared text. But what happens is you share the experience. So as you come in for this 1 hour, 1 day, or 2 day positive intervention, depending on the test, you see that you're not alone because you're hearing from that intact team about your frustrations and hopes. And then you hear this research together and you've shared this text so you actually have common language, and where our words go, our brains go. And then we get them to create a work routine change together. And then we get them to commit to a positive habit. That's the entirety of the intervention we do. At Genesis Health, what we found is within a 6-week period of time, the groups that went through this, the burnout rates were skyrocketing in the hospital. That was the narrative we had about the pandemic. But the burnout rates for the teams that went through this together with shared texts, shared beliefs, and shared routines, their burnout rate dropped in half of what it was pre-COVID, which is beautiful, and many of you do work to decrease this burnout.
but we couldn't get the leadership to buy in yet until what we found was on those teams, it turns out their patient safety scores rose dramatically. And with that feedback loop, we got to the entire hospital system. Now they have top 1% patient safety in the nation, and their engagement scores rose dramatically, which is incredible. That same Orange Frog group, we went out to see if we could change beliefs at Orlando Health. There was a group, Orlando Health is the level 1 trauma hospital. We're in Orlando right now, right? Yeah.
Yes.
I'm in the midst of a book tour right now, so great. Welcome to Orlando. And we did work. Is anyone from Orlando Health here? Oh,
No, not from Orlando.
Oh, well, you
from
love
Orlando.
Health. Yeah, raise your hand. So great. But this study is amazing. What we did is we came in and we had them run through that positive intervention, and the work routine that they chose is that they saw that when the brain becomes more positive and you feel connected to other people, when you believe you're not alone and believe my behavior matters and this work is meaningful, then patient safety ratings rise and their patient ratings of the quality of care improve. So what they did was, at every meeting with 15 people or fewer, virtual or in person, that you can do yourself, what they decided to do was, when you came into the meeting, you already had to have one moment of growth or one thing you were grateful for, and then the group had to share, but in total it has to take less than 2 minutes, because they have life or death decisions they're about to have to make. So in 2 minutes, everyone very quickly just says one thing that's good that's going on in their life. And that's it. And it's something I've listened to them. They're like things like, I don't know, my kids made me pancakes this morning. That made me happy. There's small things like that. So they did this because when they would come into the meetings, what happens first changes your beliefs for the rest of the meeting. And what was starting it with was frustrations with patients, frustrations with insurance, and frustrations with the government. And then they were trying to solve problems with their brain already feeling like my behavior doesn't matter and I don't matter and I have nothing more to give in the midst of this and there's nothing to be grateful for. So what we had them do is do this. And they did it for 3 weeks during the study. And then they said, why are we still doing it? That happiness guy's gone, right? And they said, this is part of our culture. If you believe that a positive brain leads to positive outcomes, what are you doing before you do your work to improve those outcomes? So they did it for 3 years. Andy lives here in Orlando, knows that he would walk them through this whole story. 3 years almost the day we started this, the Pulse nightclub shooting occurred 3 blocks away. All the victims from the mass shooting came to a hospital system that for 3 years have been preparing by talking about gratitudes to deepen social bonds in case the unthinkable happened, and then it did. And the next morning, after worst tragedy they experienced, they started their meetings with gratitudes. And the most grateful thing that they were grateful for was the community response. But the second most common thing was that they were so grateful that they hadn't wasted the last 3 years just working with the people they worked with. What they had done in those moments of sharing those beliefs, if you say, I don't know, my kids made me pancakes, I guess that made me happy. I love pancakes. I like my kids. And what happens in those moments is my brain creates a node of social connection that deepens your perception of social connection, which is the greatest predictor of resilience when times get tough. It builds up your emotional immune system, not just your physical immune system. That allows, so now when they go out to other hospitals, the very first thing they train them to do is to start their meetings with positives, because it allows them to create not only greater levels of patient safety, but to prepare for those difficult moments. There's lots of ways in which you can change your beliefs. If you get the book, please make it to part 3. Just skip ahead if you need to, because I'm so nervous people are not going to get to the third part of the book. And the third part of the book is, how do you change? Beliefs are powerful. Okay, great. Yeah, what do I do? There are 6 different ways when I look at history about ways in which you can change your beliefs. You can change the memory upon which those beliefs are held. You can change the language. You can change the sources. You can change the contagious routines. And you can change the part of the brain processing that belief. We won't get to talk about all of those here today, but I want to talk about one that I got to do with WorkHuman. So several years ago, I got to do a partnership with WorkHuman and LinkedIn. And what we looked at was how you could get people to believe that their behavior matters. And we had people write basically 2-minute positive emails praising or thanking someone at a peer-to-peer level, right? So it was the peer-to-peer praise through the WorkHuman system. And then what we did was, we tracked them. And what we found is if you received 3 touch points of praise over a 6-month period of time, the retention rates in LinkedIn from 80% to 94%. Same pay, same building, same job, same benefits, 14-point swing of whether or not they wanted to be there. The reason is that piece of praise that seemed so small was activating some of those core beliefs. I matter. I'm feeling that because someone gave me a piece of praise. I felt it when someone nice here today, when you said that this research had an impact upon you and that it then impacted upon on your company. I came in so nervous about this talk, like how do I hold all this? I don't even have slides. What am I going to do, right? And then I heard this moment and it changed me in that moment. That's exactly what happens. When somebody receives those pieces of praise, it makes you believe that you matter, your work matters because people can see it, and you're not alone. And look at the people you work with. And it caused a 14-point swing in the way that they were looking at the world. A few years ago, when I wrote my last book, my wife was pregnant at the time. And we had an experience that I think confirms exactly what we were seeing here with this research. Oh, let me tell you. So I'm going to save that story to the very end. Let me tell you some other ways we can change our beliefs first. Let me tell you one that I wish was sexier, but it is the most powerful, fastest way to upgrade your beliefs in a short period of time. And that sounds like I'm talking about a hack here, but this is so powerful, but it seems so simple. People are going to just, I'm afraid you're going to forget it, but this can change your parenting and your leadership immediately when you walk out of this room. We say things all the time to encourage people's beliefs, like, I know you're gonna love that new school, honey, right? Or we are gonna hit our sales target 6 months from now. We are gonna be an X billion-dollar company 5 years from now. I believe that you are gonna make the basketball team. I believe you're gonna find someone to go to prom with. I believe someone's gonna wanna go on a date with you. It's okay, I'll believe that you'll find somebody special in that. Like I believe you're gonna overcome cancer, right? When I left for this talk, my wife, Michelle, as I was leaving out the door, she was leaving for a talk also, and as the door was closing behind me to get into the Uber, she said, she knew I was nervous about this talk, she's like, you're gonna do great at your talk, honey, and I was like, you don't know that, and then the door closed. And let me tell you why my brain rebelled against that in the moment. By the way, she's great at praise, and also I'm slightly scared of her, so she, I just want to let you know, she doesn't need any advice about how to give praise at all. But here's what was happening in those moments. She gave me a belief stem. I believe you're going to do well at that talk. It's the same thing we were just talking about. Here's why those are a meager meal for the brain. It's missing a warrant and a qualifier. A warrant in philosophy is just the because statement, and the qualifier is the if-then statement. The because is based upon previous action, the if-then qualifier is based upon future action. So let me give you some examples, because if you just add a qualifier and a warrant to your beliefs, they become so much more powerful. The efficacy rate, the adoption rate, and the inception rate rises dramatically. So let me give you examples of what this looks like practically. If you say, I believe you guys are going to hit your sales target 6 months from now. I believe you guys can do it. Let's clap for everyone. That's the way that we do it in raw sales, right? But you hear that, and sometimes if you're feeling like you're not getting good sales, you're like, yeah, right? That's what you hear when you're doing that. That's a lot of work that you're talking about. But if the leader instead just add in a warrant, the warrant is because. You just add in, because you've hit your targets 3 years in a row, because we have new technology, and because we're better prepared than our competitors, I believe you're going to hit this target 6 months from now. Completely different efficacy, adoption, inception level on the backside of it. Because your brain goes from rebelling into, here's previous examples that prove it, why I should adopt this new belief. Or if a kid is going to a new school for the first time, and you're in the car with them, and you're like, honey, I know you're going to love this new school, right? Much more power. The kid's probably thinking, that's not the case, I'm gonna go to my old school. But if you say something like, I saw how quickly you made friends on your soccer team. And remember when you started at that last school, you knew no one, and now you have so many friends, you didn't even want to come to this school. Because of that, I know you're gonna make friends here and you're gonna love being at that school. It goes from, yeah, right, mom, to you're right, mom, because there's previous warrants in our brain for that experience. The other version is qualifiers. So qualifiers are that if you do this statement. right? So if a manager says, I believe you can hit these sales targets, much more powerful is to say, if you keep making these calls, if you stay on script, if you stay close to our core values, if you are connected to one another and do these emotional huddles, then I believe that you're gonna hit those sales targets. So what you're doing is not just a wish with that belief, you're trying to get to the wish fulfillment, which is the action that should be taken post the belief. So another example of that is if you know someone who's sick or has cancer, we'd be like, you're gonna beat this cancer, right? And you know what? It could be the same response that I had to my wife as I was leaving the house. And you don't know that. But if you change the way you frame that belief stem to say, instead of being like, I believe I'm gonna beat cancer, it's if I keep going, listening to my doctor, if I eat healthy, if I connect deeply to my friends, if I connect to some sort of spiritual or religious connection, if I go through chemo if I need to, then I believe that I can beat this cancer. What happens is not just a belief, but you change the action that happens next. When you pair a warrant and a belief, when you're parenting or leading, things change instantaneously. So that's why it's not a sexy one, but it's so powerful. You're gonna catch yourself and other people just giving you a belief, but without the warrant and the qualifier. But if you give it, you instantly become a better parent and a better leader. So where I want to leave us here today is about the belief about mattering in the midst of this world. So a few years ago, my daughter Zoe a few years ago, I wrote a book, and my wife was pregnant at the time, so we decided the book should come out the first week of February because we were going to have a baby at the end of April. And the day before the book came out was the Super Bowl, and during the Super Bowl, during the first quarter, while my team was playing, my wife's water broke. We didn't know that was what was going on at the time. It was 3 months too early, and it was during the Super Bowl. So she Ubered to the hospital.
No, she did not.
Husband of the year. I got her an Uber XL, so that's fancy. She got there and he said, ma'am, your water broke. You need to stay here for 6 weeks trying to hold this baby in. 3 days later, Michelle was rushed into emergency surgery. We didn't even have a name for our baby. We almost lost her 3 times in a 2-day period of time, and she kept sparking back to life. We found her name. Her name is Zoe Sparks Acor. She just turned 8, and she's the light of my life. She's amazing. But instead of going on a book tour to talk about research on how you have to pursue happiness and success with one another instead of alone, instead, my happiness sat in an incubator in NICU being cared for these angels who were keeping her alive when my success rate would have been 0. And what we got to do is to battle test that research that we were talking about the hills and the fireflies and how we're better when we're together. But because of this, I remember it changed my beliefs. And in that hospital, overnight, while I was trying to hold Zoe's little hand when she was hooked up to all those wires under that purple light, I made a decision that I was going to step back from work and become a stay-at-home dad when I was out giving talks. So I stopped doing pretty much everything. I stopped doing media interviews and anything like that. I would occasionally go out for a talk, but I basically became a stay-at-home dad for the next couple years, and it was amazing. But it was also harder than I expected, because I watched all these opportunities start to pass by, and it felt like the world was passing by. And at first I was like okay with that, but then I was starting to worry about what was happening in the midst of it. But I'm so grateful for that time, which led to a talk that I actually got to give at Target. It was one of the few talks that I did that year, and it was for all of Target. It was this amazing opportunity to go there. That morning, I got in at 3 a.m. late from a flight, and that morning I woke up and I got 2 news alerts that put me into a tailspin. One news alert was one of my friends who's in the same space got a #1 New York Times bestseller. And normally I'd be like, great, I'm glad, I wish it was me, but great, I'm glad people are doing this good work in the world. And then right after that, I got another one, and I can't give you too many details, but somebody in the space did something awesome, amazing that I wanted. And my brain in that moment suddenly went to, hey, if you stop doing this work, the world isn't gonna be like, no, it's gonna shrug, it doesn't care. Right? And then it made me feel like maybe I matter less to the world. And then my brain said, maybe I don't matter. I was tired. I'd just gotten these 2 emails. It was petty, self-focused. We've all had those moments, but this one's extremely petty. And I started believing that I didn't matter. And I remember getting into the car to go to the talk at Target, and I remember sitting despondent in the back seat of the car, looking out the window, the passenger window, watching the world passing by. The driver took me to the wrong location. They were supposed to take me to a theater, and they took me to Target headquarters. So I called the people, and they said, hey, we're gonna send somebody, it's clear you're lost. And I was lost. But I decided to go up the escalator anyway at the Target headquarters. While I was going up the escalator, a guy came up to me and started running up the stairs next to me and shook my hand over the escalator and said, "Are you Sean Acorn?" I was like, "Yes, I thought this was the escort." And as we got up the escalator, moving up the stairs and escalator together while I was shaking my hand, he said, "I just wanted to let you know your book changed my life." And then he disappeared behind these turnstiles, and I have no idea who he was or why he was there. But I was in the wrong place, but at the right time. Now this story, which is very self-indulgent, was in that moment, my brain received a new piece of information, just like we saw with the neuroscience experiments. And in that moment, it recalculated. And it said, maybe this work is meaningful to some people. And when suddenly the scales I felt fell from my eyes. And I could see that this talk was an opportunity that maybe one person in that talk would be moved by it. And when I got back into the same car to go back to the airport, I looked out that same window, and this time I pulled out these two Paw Patrol characters, Chase and Rubble, and made a little video on my phone on the windowsill for my daughter. And I remembered, I still felt replaced in the world, but I also remembered that I chose to take a step back because I wanted to matter in their lives. In that moment, a single piece of praise. Back at the divinity school, we learned that angel just means messenger. In that moment, that person was basically like an angel. They provided a message to the brain that made me feel that my behavior mattered, which is exactly what we see with the LinkedIn study that we did with WorkHuman. It's exactly what happens when we get that piece of praise or when someone's standing next to you as you're trying to climb those hills. And in that moment, when we provide that 2-minute piece of kind praise, or you smile at someone when you leave here, or you talk about what they're interested in, or connect to them, or let them know how they've had a meaningful impact upon their life, what happens is not only does our lens change, it changes the lenses around us. I did work with all the public schools in Flint, Michigan, with the Orange Frog group, and we came in, we only had money to work with the teachers, but in the classrooms where the teachers' levels of optimism rose, when their beliefs rose about their meaning and that their work matters, the teachers, students, parents' well-being scores improved. And we weren't working with them. The students' test scores only in those classrooms rose dramatically. We weren't working with the students. If you change the lens through which a few people view the world, our lens changes not only our experience of the present, it predicts what happens next. So as we're looking at those hills in front of us, those hills collapse or expand based upon our beliefs. And if we can find a way of strengthening these beliefs that my behavior matters, I'm not alone, that I matter, this work is meaningful, I have something to give, there's something to be grateful for, and there's something greater than me, then it changes not only that experience, but it changes the math about what's possible and probable within our lives. And because of that, not only do we receive those messages and give those messages to other people, but we start to find a way of lighting up together in the dark. Beliefs brought you to this room. The real question is, where are those beliefs going to take you next? Thank you so much for letting me be here.